one, I can't hear your comments. I could hear the prayer, but it was very muffled. So either it's the microphone there, or I'm just getting old and my hearing is not very good. But in either case, if you have a comment to make tonight, I would appreciate you speaking you'll have to speak loud into the microphone so that I can hear your comment, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so before we start, we want to do a short review of what we studied yesterday. And we're going to review it by I'm going to ask you a few little questions, and we will go along the same format as we did yesterday. Lord willing, if I remember, at the top of the hour, we will take a short break. And then about 10 minutes until the end of class, I will give you a period so that you can take this little exam that I have made up. And hopefully all of you will pass this one like you did the first one. Okay, so thinking about our study from yesterday, what unique physical characteristics does the Bible give about Ehud and Eglon? Do you remember? Ehud is our judge, and Eglon was the king of Moab. What were their unique physical characteristics?
It was left-handed man. Can you hear me? Ehud was
I
a
can I
left-handed.
can I can barely hear it. Yeah, just yell it out at me.
Ehud was a left-handed man, and Hebron was the fat, big king.
Yes. Ehud was left-handed, and apparently that was a characteristic of a lot of Benjamites. And then Eglon, the Bible said he was very fat, and he was very fat, wasn't he? It took a long sword, and it even when that little dagger went into him, 16 inches long, that dagger, the fat closed in around it. He was a fat man. So what did Shamgar, and you remember Shamgar is only mentioned in one verse of scripture. So what did Shamgar use to defeat the Philistines, and how many of those Philistines did he kill?
Right, Ken, is the mic better now?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
He killed about 600 men.
Yeah, what did he kill them with?
He killed using an ox goad.
An ox goad. Yeah, exactly right. Very good. Good answer. Okay, who was the commander of Jabin's army, and how was he killed? You remember, Jabin is the king of the Canaanites, and this person, the commander of Jabin's army, he's the one that jumped out of his chariot and ran on foot. You remember?
Okay. Yes, I remember. No, I think I'm confusing him with Sisera, the one whom he was nailed on his head. I think I'm
Yeah,
confused.
well, same guy, same guy. Sisera is the commander of Jabin's army,
Okay.
and you remember who drove that tent peg in his head?
Yes, it's Jael.
Jael, yeah. The woman took his life. The big, powerful, famous military commander is killed by a woman with a tent peg. Now this is a tricky question, okay? How many chariots of iron were gathered together to the river Kishon, and how many of them became useless? So how many chariots did Sisera have to begin with, And how many of them became useless in the riverbed?
No.
Uh-oh, I guess all of you fail. Sorry.
I
Okay,
said
remember,
9,000, brother.
pardon?
I want to guess 9,000.
There were 900.
900.
900. Yeah, 10 times too many. 900 were gathered. And how many of them became useless when the flood came? They 900. The answer is 900 again, because all of them became useless, right? Yeah, Ken, you're so tricky. All right. And then this pertains to Gideon, which is the story that we just started, and we're going to pick up here today. How did the angel of the Lord refer to Gideon when he was there in the wine press threshing the wheat?
A
How did
mighty
the Lord, how did,
valor.
yes, go.
A mighty man of valor.
A mighty man of valor. And there wasn't anybody there more surprised than Gideon himself. In fact, he's like, wait, that can't be me because I am nobody. You know, I'm the least in my own family, in the least of the tribes. I'm nobody. But you remember, God sees things in us that even we don't see sometimes. Okay, so today we're going to begin in Judges chapter 6 at verse 25. Judges chapter 6 and verse 25. Now, it came to pass the same night. Okay, I want to stop right there and help us to catch our bearings. So, if what we're about to read happened the same night, what else had happened that night? What has happened prior to what we're about to read?
There was a fire that rose from sorry.
Yeah, you know, the angel of I mean, this is the same night in which the angel of the Lord had appeared to him, referred to him as the mighty man of valor. Then in return, you remember that Gideon prepared all of these things as food for his visitor, but the angel of the Lord reached out his staff and touched the grain and the things that he had provided, and then it went up in a flame there from that little makeshift altar that he had put together. And it is in this, and then the angel of the Lord just disappeared. So this says that it came to pass the very same night, that that had happened. And what I want us to keep in mind here is that this is the very same night in which Gideon is first called into service. I mean, just a little while ago, maybe in relation to this, just an hour or two before, just a short period of time. I mean, he had been hiding out. He was afraid. He's already thought that he's nobody. He doesn't have any special skills. It's only the Lord who is saying that he's the mighty man of valor. And so he was afraid. All of this is new to him. He just saw this amazing display by the angel of the Lord and the taking of the sacrifice, and then he vanishes. And so it's in that very same night that the Lord said to him, take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has. Cut down the wooden image that's beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement. And take the second bull and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the image which you shall cut down. So Gideon took 10 men from among his servants and did as the Lord had said to him. And I want to stop right there for a second. So the Lord, here in this very same night in which he has called Gideon the afraid and reluctant mighty man of war, he's already taken one of his father's animals and, made this sacrifice to begin with. Now he's asked to take the second bull and to tear down the altar that his father, and no doubt his whole family, his community, has been using to worship this false god, and going to cut down the wooden image that's right there beside it. So get rid of this false area of worship. And at the same time, I want you to build an altar to the Lord and do it exactly the right way, not this makeshift thing that you put together, but make this in proper arrangement. You take this second bull, no doubt one that his father had intended to offer to Baal, and use it as a burnt sacrifice. And you're going to burn it with the wood that you used, that you gathered from having cut down the image. Would it take a lot of courage to do something like that?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, this is not after he's had time to think about what's gone on. He is told in the very same night to actually act against his father and his community in their worship, and to take an amazing stand. Now, up until this time, Gideon has been very afraid. And so it says that Gideon took 10 men from among his servants and then did what the Lord said. In other words, Gideon's still afraid. In fact, it says that right in the second half of this verse. But because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night. So not only did he ask for help and have 10 people with him, but he also did it kind of in secret in the nighttime. Just, he was afraid. He is afraid. He's got faith because he believes in what he's doing. In fact, he takes the action to do it. But even though he has great faith, he's still afraid. Did his fear keep him from doing what his faith told him he needed to do?
No.
No, it did not. Despite his fear, he still remained faithful to God. And by the way, I think that's a tremendous lesson all by itself. Despite our fear, we still need to remain faithful. It says that when the men of the city arose early in the morning, there was the altar of Baal torn down, and the wooden image that was beside it was cut down. And the second bull was being offered on the altar which had been built. So they said to one another, "Who has done this thing?" And when they inquired and asked, they said, "Gideon the son of Joash has done this thing." Then the men of the city said to Joash, "Bring out your son that he may die, because he has torn down the altar of Baal and because he's cut down the wooden image that was beside it." But Joash, this is Gideon's father, Joash said to all who stood against him, "Would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Let the one who would plead for him be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him plead for himself, because his altar's been torn down." Therefore, on that day, he called him, that is, Joash calls Gideon Jerubbaal, saying, "Let Baal plead against him, because he's torn down his altar." Jerubbaal, kind of in that sentence, being defined as, Baal pleads, or pleading for Baal, something like that. So, it's it's one thing to meet God in the secrecy of your wine press. He was there threshing out, and he meets the angel of the Lord. Okay, that's fine, but nobody knows about it. It's quite another thing to stand up for the Lord in public. And so that very night, God is testing Gideon's dedication by asking him to tear down his father's idolatrous altar to Baal and to build an altar to Almighty God. And more than that, he was supposed to sacrifice his father's bull, probably having been reserved for Baal, on this new altar. Notice that all this is happening at his home, his father's home, but his home too. Faithfulness begins at home, doesn't it? And Gideon decided, I'm going to obey God. I'm going to be faithful to him. And despite having fear, and by necessity of that fear, doing it at night, and then again by necessity of that fear, asking for 10 of his own servants to help him, despite all of that, and of the anger that his neighborhood had, and all of his friends who wanted him dead now, despite that, Gideon did not die. In fact, quite the opposite happens. Instead of killing Gideon, Gideon becomes their leader. And ultimately, he'll be able to summon an army to prepare to fight against the Midianites. Now, I'm going to suggest here that, God doesn't use secret saints to win battles. It's not like we're just hiding out somewhere and hoping that things go well. God expects us to get out there in the open and to take our stand regardless of the cost. And I'm trying to emphasize this point, and that is that it is also regardless of any fear that we might have. Hey, I understand. Maybe our fear is justified in the sense that we think in our mind, here's what's going to happen if I take this action. But it is not justified in the sense that if I really trust that God is going to bring about the victory, I ought not have any fear. What do you think it is that God is constantly requiring us to take a stand for him?
I think faith is action, and then fear is reaction. It's a reaction of what if this thing doesn't happen the way I expect?
Yes.
Hmm.
You see, when you think that way, here's a question. When you think that way, you think ahead, you think of how it might turn out in a negative way. Who now has become your worst enemy in accomplishing something for God?
Become your worst enemy.
You become your own enemy. You are sabotaging your own action because of fear that almost always is unjustified. And even if the worst thing happens, if God is for us, are we going to be victorious?
Yes.
Yes, we are. Even if the worst thing happens, the worst thing we imagine. Now, I'm going to give, yes,
That is something.
No, I was moving it in the center.
Did he yes?
Can you hear?
do what now? Yeah, I can hear. Yes.
No, the microphone. They had a problem with the microphone.
What now?
I was pressing the microphone in the center. Can you
Oh,
hear?
okay. Okay, yeah, yes, I can. Yes, it's a lot better than it was before. Okay, thank you. You're very kind to check on that. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking at this point. We have only just started with Gideon, right? And so I mean, it is natural to be unsure about things in the beginning, but God has asked a huge thing of Gideon in the tearing down of that altar, and of basically changing, as a result of that, the entire mindset of the people. Even though he was afraid, even though he had this fear, still he acted in courage because of his faith. He really, really trusted in God. So, beginning at verse 33, then all the Midianites and Amalekites, these are their enemies, the people of the east gathered together. They crossed over the encampment of the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. Then he blew the trumpet, and the Abiezrites gathered behind him. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also gathered behind him. He also sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. So Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, so you said it, but if you're really going to do that, then I need some assurance, he says. So verse 37, look, I shall put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there's dew on the fleece only, and it's dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. I'll believe it if you will have this happen. So I'm going to put the fleece out there. We'll see what happens. And so it was, verse 38. When he rose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece together, he wrung the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. So that should be enough, right? But not for Gideon. He's still working through this now. Gideon said to God, do not be angry with me, but let me speak just once more. Let me test, I pray, just once more with the fleece. Let it now be dry only on the fleece, but on all the ground let there be dew. And God did so that night. It was dry on the fleece only, but there was dew on all the ground. So God's extraordinarily patient with Gideon here, isn't he? He absolutely is. And you know what? Sometimes God is characterized as being very hard and vengeful and all of that. I don't see that with the Lord here. The Lord is very, very patient with Gideon. And Gideon knows, especially the second request, that is basically the opposite. He flips the scenario just to make sure that it didn't happen by chance. But Gideon wants this to be right. He wants to trust that it's true, but just please be patient with me. I'm working through this. And if you'll do it the opposite in the morning, then I'll believe it. And absolutely. Next morning, Gideon finds the second scenario. It worked out too. And there wasn't anything now to do, but Gideon's going to go confront that army for God's glory. Yes.
I just want to make a comment. What I noticed with Gideon, he's not like a tempting God, but he's asking some proof or something that is tangible so he can
Yes.
act on it. And I see that also with Moses. Moses also asked to God to prove if he was gonna be able to go and get the people, the Hebrew from Egypt. And
Yes.
we see that even with Jesus, one of his disciples, when Jesus was risen, when he appeared to the 12, Thomas was not there. And then when he
Yes.
got the news, he did not believe. He said, unless I see and I touch, then I will believe. Then the Lord said to his disciple, bless those who believe without seeing. So I would say
Yes.
we are like a more blessed because we believe without seeing, but they have to request something to believe God. But we just believe without seeing. So I think the Lord was right to say we are more blessed than them.
I'm right there with you. Yeah. And that reminds me of 1 John 5 and verse 4 that says the victory that has overcome the world is our faith. I love that text, and you're exactly right. You look, it's not just Gideon. But a lot of these major characters of scripture that we often think of as being such examples of faith were people who needed reassurance. You know, Lord, I'm putting everything on the line here for you. I just need to know absolutely and for sure. And once I know that, then I'm going to go and I'm going to give all that I've got to it. Now, here's my question for you. Have you ever tested the Lord in a similar fashion?
We sometimes want to, but there is a scripture also that actually says, "Don't tempt the Lord." So we have some situations where we want to say, if you are God, prove it by doing A, B, C. But it's difficult when you say the scripture says, don't tempt God.
Yeah, here's kind of where I am on that. I tend to think that when we obey the gospel, we have come to that place in our life where we are saying effectively, Lord, I've been trusting in a lot of other things up until this point. But now that I am ready to obey the gospel, I am putting all my trust and my faith in you. And so it's like from that point on, there ought not my faith in God ought to be unquestioned, right? I don't need God to prove anything to me. He's already basically proven it by sending his son to die for me and washing my sins away. As a result of that, then, you know, there may be circumstances where I still have a sense of fear in me, where I'm not sure how this thing might turn out. But I do not doubt God that he is going to make it work out right. Now, here's the thing about that. I mentioned that Gideon is listed in Hebrews chapter 11, and he certainly is. But there are a lot of other people of faith who are listed there who are described as having died as a result of standing up for their faith. So here's the deal. I may have faith in God in some uncertain battle wherein I have great victory and I live to see the end of it. It may also be required that I die in the process of maintaining my faith. Ultimately, I won't see the victory in this life, but will I be without a victory? The answer is no. I will still have victory over death and ultimately a reward in eternity. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to be faithful no matter what. I think that Gideon has already, even in this short period of time, demonstrated a faith that is growing and very strong, but even as yet, he has not overcome the trepidation, the fear about what might happen. He's overcome a lot, and the people are with him. But as we're going to see, there is always seemingly just that little sense of a lack of certainty in some of these things. So we're starting in chapter 7 now at verse 1, continuing this story. It says, then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the well of Harod, so that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Now, therefore, proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, Whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. Okay, here is a thought that just crossed my mind. Knowing what you know about Gideon, I mean, like, who would be the first person to turn and depart from Mount Gilead if the requirement is to be fearful and unafraid?
I think it's him.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, poor Gideon, he's afraid. And yet he's proclaiming to all these people, if you're fearful and afraid, then you need to leave. Well, 22,000 of the people returned and 10,000 remained. 22,000 people left. But the Lord said to Gideon, wait a minute, now he's got 10,000. The Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. He said, bring them down to the water. I'll test them for you there. Then it will be that of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, the same shall go with you. And of whomever I say to you, this one shall not go with you, the same shall not go. So he brought the people down to the water. And by the way, I was thinking, Ehud led a group of 10,000. So it's not uncalled for. God would use an army of 10,000, but God says, you know what? I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to bring that number down even further. So the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps from the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set apart by himself. Likewise, everyone who gets down on his knees to drink. And the number of those who lapped, that is, they took the water in their hand, they lapped it up out of their hand. It says that the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people who got down on their knees, all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink the water. Now, 300 lapped it from their mouth. 9,700 of them got down on their knees and drank the water. Then the Lord said to Gideon, by the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and deliver the Midianites into your hand. Let all the other people go, every man to his place. So the people took provisions and their trumpets in their hands, and he sent away all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, and retained those 300 men. Okay, now let's put yourself in the shoes or the sandals, whatever they were, of Gideon. You have 30,000 men gathered initially, and 22,000 of them leave. How are you feeling about that right now? Are you with me? I'm not feeling good. If I'm Gideon and I'm going against an army of Midianites, which the Bible is going to describe as being practically without number, I'm looking at the Midianites and I'm like, I've only got 10,000 guys here. Wow, what in the world? Lord, what are you thinking? Are you serious? And then the Lord says, nah, that's too many. How are you feeling now that there are only 300 of you when you started off with 32,000?
Scary situation.
It is a very scary situation, especially if you don't know what the plan is. Not only that, but this is another way that the scripture is emphasizing the importance of relying on God and not depending on your own strength. We referenced 2 Corinthians chapter 12 yesterday or 2 days ago. And I was reminding us about the conversation that Paul had with the Lord about the removal of that thorn from his side. You know, Paul had the idea, if I didn't have this problem, wow, I'd be able to preach and it'd be amazing. And what did the Lord say? He said, my strength is sufficient for you, my strength is
grace.
perfect in weakness. Yes, Bella, did you have something?
Saying, my grace is sufficient.
Yes, my grace. Yes, that's right. My grace is sufficient. What I give you is going to be all you need. So, how does dependency on our own strength detract from a reliance on God? If you rely on your own strength, how does that take away from relying on God?
You're fighting a losing battle, my brother.
Yeah, you're going to you may lose, but let's say, there have been ungodly people who win battles. Let's say you do win. Then what are you going to say?
I did it my way.
I did it my way. I did it. Look what I did. Well, God is the one who's to be glorified here. And he had already said, the reason that I don't want you going with this large army is because if you win, then you'll just say, well, we did it. We were strong. We had the skill to go in there and be victorious. This is going to be a defining example of God's power when he uses people who are submitting themselves to his leadership and to his way. It's just, to me, it's so impressive. So Gideon isn't finished with needing encouragement. So chapter 7, beginning at verse 8, it says, now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. They have taken the high ground. But Midian was below him in the valley. It happened on the same night that the Lord said to him, arise, go down against the camp. For now, listen to this. This sounds like something we've heard before. Just like he had told Judah in the very first chapter, remember that? I have delivered it into your hand. Now, I want to stop right there. If God says, I've delivered this into your hand, what does that mean?
I have given to you.
You have assured victory. You are going to win. It's yours. It is a done deal. It's all over. The fight, everything but actually going down there and fighting the battle has been secured. I have delivered it into your hand. It's done. But now watch this, and this is subtle, so don't miss it. But if you are afraid to go down, then go down to the camp with Purah, your servant. Verse 11, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hand shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. Now, I just want to make this point because I think this is pretty important. God says, now Gideon, you go down there, go by yourself, just go down there, and you're going to hear what they say, and that's going to be a sign to you of what happens. You'll be strengthened and you'll know you're going to have the success. But if you have fear in you, then take your servant with you. Now, look at the very next thing that said. Then he went down with Purah. Okay, stop. Was Gideon afraid or not afraid? He's still afraid. The Lord says, if you're afraid, then take Purah with you. Meaning, if you're not afraid, go down there. You're going to be fine. I've delivered these people to you. It's a done deal. But you know what? If you're still afraid, then take Purah. So he takes Purah, his servant, with him to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. Now, the Midianites and Amalekites, all the people of the east were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number as the sand by the seashore in multitude. Think of this. Gideon and his servant moving now into the midst of this incredible mass of fighting men whose ultimate goal is to destroy Gideon and his little uprising. Verse 13, when Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. He said, I've had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread. And by the way, you may or may not know this, but barley bread was about as cheap and worthless of a bread as you could make. And who is the barley bread representative of?
The Israelites.
Who is the loaf of barley bread, which is cheap and insignificant? Who does that represent?
Gideon.
That's Gideon. That's Gideon says, in fact, Gideon said that of himself, right? I'm nobody. So this loaf of, he says, hey, I've had this dream, and in my dream, this loaf of barley bread, it tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed. Now, literally and actually, Gideon has come into the camp, and he is right there listening to what's happened, but this is a picture of a much bigger event. And the companion answered and he said, this is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God's delivered Midian and the whole camp. Now, first of all, think about this. This is the enemy speaking. This is just one instance of someone who has had a dream. I don't know what, maybe this was representative of all of those men who were there that night sleeping. Maybe all of them have had the same dream. God is planting in their minds the potential of them being destroyed. And so it is going to create within them already, without anything else happening, it's already creating a sense of foreboding. We are now afraid of what might happen. And so it was when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation that he worshiped. He is so overwhelmed by what he hears and about the potential for the success that he just stops and worships and glorifies God. He returned to the camp of Israel, and here's what he said. Arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. Does this now sound like a man who is without fear and confident in God?
Yes, yes.
Yes, it does. And he's just like, let's go. And so he divided the 300 men into 3 companies. And he took a trumpet, put a trumpet into every man's hand with empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers. And he said to them, look at me and do likewise. Watch. And when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. Now, that is the quote, that is the quote that was coming out of the mouth of those soldiers that were there. And so you're thinking they're already predisposed to this notion that this thing is about to happen to them. They don't know how it's going to happen, but they're afraid that, the sword of Gideon is about to come upon them. And so he says, look, you're going to take you're going to take the trumpet, blow the trumpet. You're going to shatter the clay pot that is covering, the torch. When all this happens, it is going to simultaneously confuse the enemy. Now, whether it was the sound or, when the shattering of the pot no doubt sounded like someone drawing their sword, and actually they're crying out the sword of the Lord and of Gideon with the torch. Usually, and I'm no historian on these things, but I understand that usually, a unit of soldiers, whether that's 100 or so, might be represented by the torch as it's leading the way and showing the light. And so the enemy would have been aware of this. And keep in mind, Gideon has the higher ground. So they're up above the enemy. As the enemy looks out and they're startled by the sound, not sure what that sound is. Is that people drawing their swords? It sounds like thousands and thousands of swords have been drawn. They're led by leaders with torches, and immediately there's going to be fear struck into the heart of everyone who is witness to these things. And by the way, remembering that they're waking up out of their sleep, no doubt having had this dream of Gideon's victory to begin with. You know, a trumpet, all of them, when they left from the water test, grabbed up their trumpet. So everybody had some kind of trumpet. And they had pitchers and torches. I mean, these are pretty simple things. These are not things you typically associate with a battle or with fighting, with war. Have you ever seen God do extraordinary things with ordinary means?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Anybody venture to offer an example of that?
I've forgotten the individual, but he killed an army using the jawbone of a donkey.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, those stories are amazing. Hey, I wanna, do you guys get those little books that are called The Voice of Truth? Do you get any of those? They're little books about, I don't know, this thick, and they're about this big. They're very small. It's called Voice of Truth. When
Brother
I go
Ken,
on,
Yeah. They are
uh,
very,
I managed to download all of them.
okay, all right. Well, here's the thing. That little book goes all over the world. No matter where I go, whether South Africa, I go into the South Pacific islands like Fiji and Samoa, Saipan, all of those islands out there. I'll go out there. I'll be in a church building, maybe I'll see Voice of Truth, little book. So that book is published by a group that's called World Evangelism, that actually is in Winona, Mississippi, which is about a 3-hour drive from where I am right now. That facility there in Winona, I had always thought in my mind, man, that must be a big operation. There must be hundreds of people that are there helping to publish these materials, all of these articles. And then not only that, they also publish all kinds of other materials and tracts and things. Wow, what a group of people that must be. But actually, that entire operation that provides materials that go out to all the world is run by J.C. Choate's widowed wife. He died many years ago, but his wife is there, and she is very aged. There are 2 people that work with her who serve kind of as the leadership of the operation, and they have 2 additional people who work on those grounds to help them in the production of all these materials. Now, did you notice what I just shared with you? Materials that go to all the world actually find their origination in the work of about 5 people. Now, do other people contribute to the work? Do other people pitch in? Sure. Sometimes we have groups that go from the church where I preach here. We'll travel down there and help them pack up materials in boxes to ship out to places all over the world. But what I'm trying to tell you is it doesn't take an army of people in order to accomplish something that can reach the whole world. 5 people can work together in order to publish materials that an entire world can use. Who knows what God will do with you if you remain faithful to him and if you common and simple things to his glory. Chapter 7, beginning at verse 19. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch. Just as they posted the watch and they blew the trumpets, they broke the pitchers that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. They held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands were blowing, and they cried, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon!" And every man stood in his place all around the camp, and the whole army ran and cried out and fled. When the 300 blew the trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword, the Midianites and the Amalekites, he set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. And the army fled to Beth Acacia toward Zerera, as far as the border of Abel Meholah by Tabbath. And the men of Israel gathered together from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh and pursued the Midianites. Then Gideon sent messengers throughout all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize from them the watering places as far as Beth Barah, the Jordan." Then all the men of Ephraim gathered together and seized the watering places as far as Beth Barah, the Jordan. And they captured 2 princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. They pursued Midian, brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. Wow! An incredible victory for the Lord. How would you feel if you woke up in the middle of the night to strange sounds outside your house? What would you do? Would you be startled? Would you go, forget it, I'll go back to sleep? I mean, what would you do?
Terrified.
I will leave the lights
Terrified.
on. I will leave the lights on, brother.
Man, I'd be afraid. Isn't it interesting? And think about this. Up until this point, what we've been talking about is the fear of Gideon. Finally, when Gideon gets to the point where he overcomes his fear and he tells his 300 to arise and we're going to go have this great victory, now that fear is transferred to all of those Midianites. I think that's an incredible story. You think that there are enemies that we can defeat if we would have faith like that and set aside our fear?
Yeah, yes.
Absolutely, and without any question.
Mm.
Okay, it's the top of the hour, so we're going to take a short little break. I'll give you about 10 minutes or so if you need to run to the restroom or get some water. And then when we come back, we will be studying beginning at Judges chapter 8. We'll take about a 10-minute break. I'll see you in a few minutes. Of Gideon. All right, so we're in Gideon. We're in Judges chapter 8. We're going to start at verse 1. Now the men of Ephraim said to him, "Why have you done this to us by not calling us when you went to fight with the Midianites?" And they reprimanded him sharply. I think this is another funny, hilarious scenario. So Ephraim went with 300 men, had this tremendous victory against the Midianites. So Ephraim comes along and they're like, "Well, why didn't you call us? Why didn't we get share in that?" And so Gideon says, "Well, what have what have I done in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God's delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb, and Zeb. And what was I able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger toward him subsided when he said that. Sometimes sometimes what we have to do, instead of just like, "I'm gonna get you, where were you, and you were afraid," and yeah, instead of that, we just try to make peace with people. And one way of making peace with people is to highlight some of the good things that they've done and kind of minimize, bring yourself down and push them up. What we're seeing with Gideon right here is some skill in dealing with people that I think is going to come in handy down the road. Gideon was a person who is growing. I mean, he was admittedly what he said of himself, "I'm nobody now." Not only is he victorious with a small army with God on his side and trusting God completely, but also now he's learning how to deal with people. And I mean, some people would say that he really manipulated them. I mean, he used their own vanity in order to turn the tide and to win them to himself. When Gideon came to the Jordan, it says that he and the 300 men. Now, notice that, don't forget, Gideon's traveling with that same 300 men. They were with him and he crossed over the Jordan. They were exhausted, but still in pursuit. Then he said to the men of Succoth, "Please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me." Remember, just 300, for they're exhausted, and I'm pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian. The leaders of Succoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give bread to your army?" In other words, okay, so what you're telling us is Zebah and Zalmunna are still out there. You haven't done anything to them yet. And if we were to help you and they caught wind of it, I mean, there's only 300 of you. I mean, they're likely to come here and let us have it, take out their vengeance on us. So they decide they're not going to help. Gideon said, "For this cause, when the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars." Then he went up from there to Penuel and spoke to them in the same way. And the men of Penuel answered, and they, as the men of Succoth had answered. So he also spoke to the men of Penuel, and he said to them, "When I come back in peace, I'll tear down this tower." Now, Zebah and Zalmunna were at Karkor, and their armies with them, listen now, about 15,000, all who were left of all the army of the people of the east. For 120,000 men who drew the sword had fallen. So far, 120,000 were put down by the 300, and with God leading the way. There are still 15,000 with Zebah and Zalmunna. Then Gideon went up by the road of those who dwell in tents on the east of Nobah and Jogdah. And he attacked the army while the camp felt secure. When Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued them, and he took the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and routed the whole army. Again, an unbelievable, incredible victory. What is it that motivates an army to be so determined in spite of the tremendous obstacles and the opposition? What is it that motivated these men to keep going no matter what they faced?
They have God on their side. God on their side, and uh, they, they trust in God
And
because
absolutely.
they experience what God has done up till that point for them.
Yeah, you know, it's not only Gideon now. These 300 men had seen the same incredible victory that Gideon had seen. And no doubt, as they stood there with Gideon on the, on the heights above that Midianite army, they're thinking, wait a minute, we, just the 300 of us, are going to go against them? You have to know that their faith was just, their faith became the same as Gideon's faith. Yeah? What do you think about that? Anybody, just jump in there.
100%.
100%. Yeah. Let's go. Is there anything too hard? Shake your head this way. No, there is nothing too hard for the Lord. Absolutely not. And Gideon's not finished. Beginning of verse 13. Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from battle from the ascent of Heres, and he caught a young man of the men of Succoth and interrogated him. He wrote down for him the leaders of Succoth and its elders, 77 men. Then he came to the men of Succoth, and he said, here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you ridiculed me, saying, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we would give bread to your weary men? And he took the elders of the city and thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth. He did exactly what he said he would do. And not only that, he tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. And he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, what kind of men were they whom you killed at Tabor? So they answered, as you are, so were they. Each one resembled the son of a king. Then he said, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you. And he said to Jether, his firstborn, rise, kill them. But the youth would not draw a sword. Here it is again, for he was afraid, because he was still a youth. Now watch this. Here's a big transition. So Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise yourself and kill us, for as a man is, so is his strength. So Gideon arose, but notice what it does not say. It does not say Gideon arose and was afraid. It says that Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna and took the crescent ornaments that were on their camels' necks. Has Gideon changed?
Yeah.
Is he the same as he was when he was standing afraid in the wine press?
No.
Gideon is not the same. Gideon has grown in confidence. He has grown in faith. He has become practically fearless. With this same 300 men, not only did he defeat 150, but he took down the 15,000 and also punished the people of Succoth and Penuel. You think that Gideon overreacted with Succoth and Peniel, or did he give them what was coming?
I think he,
I mean, honestly, was he asking for that much? Please give a little bread for my men. They're hungry. What do you think about that?
oh,
That's overreacting.
Say that again.
I'm saying maybe overreacted.
Maybe overreacted. You don't give us bread, we're going to take your leaders, we're going to scrape them up with briars, and if you don't pin by the time he got, I'm guessing by the time he got Peniel, he was so aggravated that not, you notice, not only did he tear down the tower, but he did what? He killed all the men. So yeah, in some respects, he now it's like, and maybe this is something also, you know, you become empowered, you fear the Lord, you've come to a good place. Now you feel so empowered that now maybe you're going a little too far in the other direction. And I mentioned that because of what is about to happen. Beginning at verse 22. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son, your grandson also, for you've delivered us from the hand of Midian. Gideon said to them, I'll not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Now that sounds good right there. Stop and don't go any farther. But then Gideon said to them, I would like to make a request of you, that each of you would give me the earrings from his plunder, for they had gold earrings because of the Ishmaelites. So they answered, we will gladly give them. And they spread out a garment, and each man threw into it the earrings from his plunder. Now, the weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides a crescent, ornament, pendants, purple robes, which were on the kings of Midian, and besides the chains that were around their camels' necks. Stop right there. Gideon says, no, don't make me your king. The Lord's the king. Don't make my son or my grandson, none of that. But yeah, the Lord's the king. But I'll tell you what, I will take, some of your plunder like a king would take. I'll take some of the other gold things that you've gotten like the king would take. I'll also take those purple robes that those kings were wearing because that's what kings wear. I'll just take that for myself. And besides that, I'll also take the chains from around the camels' necks that designated them as kings for myself. What is he doing?
Delving
He
rich.
may not. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, he's focusing on his riches now. He wants to be self-enriched now.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. He was in such a good place. He was doing great. And then all of a sudden, yeah, I know that God's the king, but short of being the king and being called the king, I want everything that comes to a king. I just think that tells us a little bit about, we talked about how he went too far, and I think he's continuing to go in that direction. He's still taking things too far. Beginning at verse 28. Thus Midian was subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted their heads no more. Country was quiet for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Then Jerubbaal, son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house. That's Jerubbaal's Gideon. Gideon had 70, that sounds pretty kingly, doesn't it? Gideon had 70 sons who were his own offspring, for he had many wives. Sounds like a king. His concubine, sounds like a king, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, whose name he called Abimelech. Now Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of Joash's father in Ophrah of the Abizrites. Now, remember that altar was set up in the same place. So when Gideon dies, he dies back at his home place. He's buried there, along with where the altar was that he had built and all of that. So it was as soon as Gideon was dead that the children of Israel played the harlot with the Baals and meant Baal Bereth their god. Thus the children of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side, nor did they show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, Gideon, in accordance with the good that he had done for Israel. So even though Midian is no longer a threat to the Israelites, the failure to remember Almighty God has also slipped once their leader is gone. And this also is a reoccurring theme, something that was mentioned from day one. Why is it that God chooses one leader? Well, that one leader was awesome and powerful and did great things. God used him, and even though he went too far eventually, the fact is that he's still trusting God, maintained peace for 40 years. God was with them. Wow. But they weren't kind to the family of Gideon. And ultimately, he dies, and the people return to Baal worship. They don't remember the Lord who had rescued them in such an amazing way. Why do you think that the people waited until Gideon died before they went to Baal worship again?
Because maybe Gideon did not allow them to worship God.
I completely agree. I think as much as Gideon had risked in his earlier life and all the trust that he had in God, he wasn't going to let that happen. Not now. And so, yeah, as long as he was there and basically in charge, he was not going to allow it. So now, beginning at chapter 9, we have another very interesting story. This is a pretty negative story here. This is about Abimelech. Some people count Abimelech as one of the judges, but in fact, he is not one of their great deliverers. So there's some debate about that. I did not list him in my list of judges, although there is a large piece of scripture here that is dedicated to what happens. It's kind of in the aftermath of what Gideon had set up. Gideon did not accept for himself kingship, but he certainly now, in living practically as a king, leaves open the door of possibility that somebody might step through that door and actually try to be the king. And that's what happens here. So this starts Judges chapter 9. Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, Gideon, the son of Gideon, remember of that concubine, went to Shechem to his mother's brothers and spoke with them and with all the family, the house of his mother's father, saying, please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem. Which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal reign over you, or that one reign over you? Remember that I am your own flesh and bone. His mother's brothers spoke all these words concerning him in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, and their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "Oh, he's our brother." So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal Bereth, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. Then he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, the 70 sons of Gideon, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left because he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth Milo, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. Now, when they told Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim. This is the one brother who is left living. So they told Jotham what had happened to all the brothers. He went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim, lifted his voice and cried out and said to them, "Listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, 'Reign over us.' But the olive tree said to them, 'Should I cease giving my oil, with which they honor God and men, and go to sway over trees?' Then the tree said to the fig tree, 'You come and reign over us.' But the fig tree said to them, 'Should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit and go to sway over trees?' Then the tree said to the vine, 'You come and reign over us.' But the vine said to them, 'Should I cease my new wine, which cheers both God and men, and go to sway over trees?' Then all the trees said to the bramble, and this he is likening to Abimelech, 'You come and reign over us.' And the bramble said to the trees, 'If in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon.' Now, therefore, if you have acted in truth and sincerity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal, Gideon, and his house, and have done to him as he deserves, for my father fought for you, risked his life, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian. But you have risen up against my father's house this day and killed his 70 sons on one stone, and made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the men of Shechem, because he's your brother. If then you've acted in truth and sincerity with Jerubbaal and his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, then let fire come from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and Beth Milo. And let fire come out from the men of Shechem from Beth Milo and devour Abimelech. And Jotham, the only remaining son, ran away and fled. And he went to Beer and dwelt there for fear of Abimelech, his brother. Boy, isn't that something, though? You talk about an ungrateful group of people. Gideon had done so much for his people, and now he has died and left behind a legacy of 70 sons. And Shechem, in its own desire to be something, the big city, the big town, they've got Abimelech in there, and they're like, you know what? Yeah, we're going to follow you, and we're going to kill all of Gideon's sons. How would you describe Abimelech's character? What kind of person is he?
He's arrogant.
Arrogant. Did he deserve what he got as king in becoming king? Did he deserve it?
No.
No, he was from the concubine,
Yeah.
so I don't
Um,
think he's the rightful heir to the throne.
Not at all. And you see how Jotham exposed Abimelech's weaknesses? He is like, seriously, he doesn't have anything at all to offer you. And I like how he went down through the scenario of all those trees and even the grapevine, all of which are capable and able to provide. They didn't choose any of them. They chose the bramble, the one who doesn't have anything at all to offer them, chose him to be their leader. What in the world? Verse 22. After Abimelech had reigned over Israel 3 years, so he's been in this position. They chose him. He's been in position for 3 years. Everybody's probably still in shock about what had happened. God sent a spirit of ill will. I want to stop right there for a second. How does God send a spirit of ill will? How does God even send anything that's evil? What in the world?
Just like he sent a lying spirit.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah, it is something, as we're going to see, that creates some disruption. Yeah, there's going to be gossip and a little talking behind the scenes and backbiting and all of that, discontent. But verse 23 says that God sent that. What is that all about?
Yeah, what I'm referring to is that when the angels came in front to God, and I forget the passage now, and God said, I will send a lying spirit. Do you remember the passage where God says, send a lying spirit?
Yeah, and I was thinking about when Paul writes to the Thessalonians, he tells them that there was going to come that very same kind of spirit, and that he was going to allow people to believe a lie, in the sense that if that's what you want to do, then I'll allow it. I'm not going to protect you from it. If that is your inclination, then I will allow that to happen to you, if that's your desire. And you get the idea that probably what Jotham, this is my interpretation here now, but you get the idea that what Jotham had said to these folks, it was kind of festering in the back of their mind. Like, really, have we chosen the right guy? Did we do the right thing? But since they were complicit in the death of 70 sons of Gideon, they decided to go with it. But after 3 years, that thing that has festered in them for so long, God isn't going to hold the lid on it. God is allowing it to fester even further. And so it says that God sends this ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem, the very ones who had put him in this position. And the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the crime done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might be settled and their blood be laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and of the men of Shechem, who aid them in the killing of his brothers. And the men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who passed by them along that way. And it was told Abimelech. Now, Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his brothers and went over to Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. So they went out into the fields and gathered grapes from their vineyards and trod them and made merry. And they went into the house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, Who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and not Zebul, his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. But why should we serve him? If only this people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech. So he said to Abimelech, Increase your army and come out. When Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was aroused, and he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, Take note, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem, and here they are, fortifying the city against you. Now, therefore, get up by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field, and it shall be, as soon as the sun is up in the morning, that they shall rise early and rush upon the city. And when he and the people who are with you, with him, come out against you, you may then do to them as you find opportunity. So, wow. You know, everybody with ill intent is going to get what's coming to them. And after 3 years of relative success, Abimelech finds himself in trouble. You know, it's one thing to acquire the throne, but when you get it, then you got to defend it and retain it. And the citizens of Shechem, who had actually helped him to become the king, they don't want him being king anymore. And so, you know, Gaal, who himself was a nobody, is now looking to take that position. It just becomes a terrible failure, especially on the part of Shechem, the town, the city of Shechem, who should have known better. So there is ultimately, beginning here in verse 34, the picture of the resolution of these problems. So Abimelech and all the people who are with him rose by night, they lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. When Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance to the city gate, Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from lying in wait. Then Gaal saw the people, and he said to Zebul, Look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains. But Zebul said to him, You see the shadows of the mountains as if they were men. You're seeing things. Gaal spoke again. He said, See, people are coming down from the center of the land, and another company is coming from the diviner's terebinth tree. Zebul said to him, Where indeed is your mouth now, with which you said, Who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? Are not these the people whom you despise? Go out, if you will, and fight with them now. You said, in other words, you said Abimelech was nobody. You said that he's going to be just a pushover. And now they're afraid. So Gaal went out, leading the men of Shechem, and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled from him, and many fell wounded to the very entrance of the gate. Then Abimelech dwelt in Arumah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his brothers, so that they would not dwell in Shechem. Oh boy. So basically, Abimelech uses some of, Gideon's strategy from before. Although he didn't have Gideon's faith and he didn't have the weapons that Gideon and his men used, yet you get the impression that Zebul had convinced Gaal that he was his friend. And then Gaal actually believes the lie that Zebul tells him, that there isn't anything happening, and you said he was a pushover. And as the 2 men stand by the gate early that morning, Abimelech is setting this trap, and Zebul is out there, he's laying the bait. And so when it's obvious that an army is actually attacking, Gaal is kind of caught unawares. And it was time to either put up or shut up. If he hid in the city, then he'd have lost his following. People had said he was disgraced. He had eventually been caught and killed. If he tried to run away, Abimelech's men would have chased him down and killed him. All that he could do is go out there and try to face Abimelech while he was yet unprepared. And as a result of that, his army was routed, and he and all of his men were driven up out of the city. Have you ever found yourself in a no-win situation? Where you felt like you didn't have any good choices? No, Brother Ken, we are always prepared. Okay. Here was a tremendous challenge that presented itself, and despite Abimelech being it's like, in my mind, there was no winner here. Abimelech may have put down what was an insurrection, but still Abimelech had all the blood on his hands. Ultimately, there's going to be a terrible undoing of all of these things, and Abimelech's going to suffer greatly. But this is just a picture of another dark period in the life of Israel during the time of the judges. Okay, anybody got something to pitch in there?
Brother Ken,
Yes.
the verse that Sister Bella was looking for is 1 Kings 22, verse 21 to 23. And there came forth a spirit and stood before the Lord and said, I will persuade him. And the Lord said unto him, wherewith? And he said, I will go forth, and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all the prophets. So that is the verse she's looking for now.
Yeah. There are actually several instances in which, and at least we would say, a negative spirit is employed by God, but never against, somebody who is otherwise doing well. It's always against somebody whose decision is to do the wrong thing. And you know what? If that's what we want to do, God will aid us in accomplishing that. Not to our glory. I mean, we're going to suffer for it, but if you don't want to follow God, He's not going to make you do it. In fact, He'll even make it easy for you to do otherwise, if that is what you have intended to do. Okay, thank you for that, Isaac. Really appreciate it. Time's up. So I have left with wisdom a test for you to take. It's a short little test, very similar to the one that you had before. I'm sure that all of you will pass it, and I hope that you will. I'll be praying for your success. Thank you so much for your attention. I know many of you probably already had a busy day, and it's tough to it's tough already to have a class over Zoom, but I'm sure it's challenging for you. So I really appreciate the commitment that you're making to these classes. We will meet again on Monday, Lord willing. So I will look forward to seeing you then, and we will next week, if the Lord is with us, we will finish our study of the book of Judges. Thank you so much, and good luck on your test.
Thank you. Thank you for your
All
time.
right.
Thank you,
I
Brother
love
Ken.
you, and I'll be praying for you. Thank you.
Thank you. God
you.
bless.